My name is Maggie Chen. I'm the director of the Institute for International Economic Policy. On behalf of IIEP, it's my great delight to have you here today. In the last year, the U.S.-China economic relations, arguably the most important bilateral relationship in the world, has proven to be also the most vulnerable one. The ties between the two countries established over the past 4 decades have gone through many different phases and sentiments in a matter of few months. From brief periods of enchantment and expectations last November, to shock and confusion soon after, from anxiety to disappointment, from anger to despair, and now plunged into a deep chill. True that many issues enter the equation when it comes to the two countries' economic relations. In fact, I just noticed this the other day. Maybe many of you already noticed that. Many of the issues in this relationship seem to start with letter T. Taiwan, right? Tiananmen, Tibet, and most recently, technology, trade, tariff, and last but not least, President Trump's economic policy. So it's now more important than ever, I believe, for all of us, not just the academics and policy practitioners, but also the general public, to have a better evidence-based, non-partisan understanding of how these issues will influence not just the US and China, but also the rest of the world. Annual School and IIEP have been a leading platform for this debate and conversation in the last decade. Consisting of about 50 faculty from over 10 disciplines, IIEP has 4 signature initiatives: global economic governance, ultra poverty, climate change adaptation, and the US-China economic relations. Our faculty produce first-tier research and policy advising in these 4 and related areas. At our annual China conference, we have had the pleasure to host over 100 leading scholars and policy practitioners from all over the world. We have organized over 50 panels covering macro and micro issues, and we have attracted over 2,000 participants in the last decade into our conference. Our initiative also goes beyond the annual conference. In fact, our footprint has just arrived in Beijing about a year ago with our Beijing International Trade and Investment Symposium. We have once again put together an outstanding program thanks to all the speakers and the moderators. I'm looking forward to all the presentations, but I'm also would like to take the opportunity to thank the support from alumni and our friends. In fact, our alumni and our students were the motivation for us to establish this platform to carry on this conversation. In particular, I would like to thank one of our first graduates from the International Trade and Investment Policy MA program, Mr. Ning Li. Ning has very generously recently established the Ning Li Family Endowment on US-China economic relations at IIEP to support our research, education, and policy engagement on US-China economic relations. So thank you again, Ning, for the generosity. This support will be truly invaluable for our work going forward into the next decade. Now it's my great honor to welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Hanming Fang, class of 1965 term professor of economics from the University of Pennsylvania, the world's leading expert on Chinese economy and a renowned scholar in many fields of macroeconomics and public economics. Professor Fang has had editorial roles in many prestigious journals, including, for example, American Economic Review, International Economic Review, and Journal of Public Economics. He is also a co-founder of boxchina.org, a platform that I visit regularly that provides informed analysis and insights on US-China economic relations and the Chinese economy, a mission shared precisely by IIEP. Without further ado, Professor Fang, welcome to the IIEP School.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Maggie, and thank you, Chao, and everyone here for the invitation to speak in this conference. It looks like a great program. I look forward to hearing many other presentations here. This morning, I will start off by telling you a little bit about Chinese social security system, and the title of the talk is growing pains in China's social security system. It's joint work with Zhang Yi, who's a professor at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. So, okay, so just one slide, introduction of China's basic old age insurance system for urban workers. That's the official name of China's social security system, basic old age insurance system for urban workers. There are other components of the social security system as well, but this is the main one. Okay, and it's a compulsory scheme with both defined contribution and defined benefit features. On the contribution side, China had on the contribution side, employers will be are required to pay 20% of the employee's wage bill toward the social security system, and the employees will be required to contribute 8% of their wage bill to a notional individual account. So the statutory contribution rate for China's urban workers is 28%. That's quite high, right? And in terms of benefits, the eligibility requires 15-year minimum of 15 years of contribution, and retirement age in China is very young, right? So for female workers, it's 50. If you are a blue collar worker, that accounts for about 93% of the female workers in the Chinese labor market. If you're a white collar worker, the retirement age is 55. As I said, that's about 7% of the female workers. For male workers, the retirement age is 60. And the replacement ratio, the benefit level, right, depends on, as a function of the pre-retirement age varies. But there's a formula that depends on the number of years of contribution and the individual's wage relative to a notion called local average social wage, which I will define later on in my talk, right? So that's basically the basic picture of this most important component of the China social security system, the basic old age insurance system. There are also social security components for the rural and urban individuals without employment, okay? So that's not the focus of the talk today. Okay. Now, China's social security system, I would say there are quite a few puzzling facts. The first thing I already mentioned is the statutory rate, contribution rate is very high, 28%. The pension benefit rate, I will probably speak here. Depends on how what's the denominator being used, right? If you use the individual's pre-retirement wage as a denominator, that's actually quite generous. So if the replacement rate relative to the pre-retirement wage is about 74% or maybe more, I will show you it varies by the income level. It's quite high. But if it's measured relative to the social average wage, it's quite low, only 49%. Okay, so that's the second part, relatively low benefit pension benefit rate. And the demographic structure actually right now in China is still quite favorable. In the population, that's related to population, fact number 3, the dependency ratio, the fraction of individuals between 15 to 64 relative to the number of individuals 65 or older, in China right now is 5.65 to 1. So for every retiree, there are 5.65 individuals who are in the working age, right? So that will translate into a dependency ratio of 17.7%, right? But the dependency ratio in the population is very different from dependency ratio in the pension system. So for those in the pension system, for every retiree, there are only 2.86 workers supporting the retiree. So the dependency ratio in the system is 35%. Okay, so that's but nonetheless, in the population, the demographics is still pretty favorable. Now, even with that, with very high statutory contribution rate, low benefit rate, relatively young demographic structure, the Social Security fund in China is already in deficit since 2014 for 14 provinces, for many provinces, okay? Okay, so then the second fact that's interesting is that the labor force participation rate in China is for people older than 50 is very low. I will give you more numbers later on. And despite the early retirement age, male 60, female either 50 or 55, they are even more early retirement. People retire even earlier than the statutory retirement age. Okay, I already mentioned the fact number 3, and the fact number 4 is very well known as well. Households in China save a very high rate, at a higher, more than 40% savings rate, right? So all these facts is puzzling, right? On the one hand, the contribution rate is so high, the pension rate benefit is low. How come we still end up with Social Security Trust Fund running a deficit? And the point of the paper is to provide a unified theory that can explain all these facts that I described here. Okay? Okay, so I'll give you a few more supporting documents regarding the fact I mentioned. This is the picture, this is the data about the dependency ratio in China versus in OECD countries. And the closer the country is to the center, the better the dependency, the lower the dependency ratio. Okay, meaning that the demographic structure is favorable for a social security system. China is here, right? Is among in terms of the demographic structure is quite close to the center, right? So that's the first thing. Dependency ratio in China is quite favorable. This is the labor force participation rate of the old China versus OECD countries. In 2010, 1% population survey, for individuals between 55 to 64, the male participation rate, labor force participation rate in China is about 40%. OECD average is lower bound of 35.6%. The average is 64%. For female in China, in this age group, 55 to 64, the female labor force participation rate is 12%. OECD average, depending on 2007 or 2012, is about 45%. Right. So in both, even though China is still relatively developed, okay, the labor force participation rate for this population is quite low. Okay, and moreover, the labor force participation rate in China is declining over time. So this is the data for comparing 2000 and the 2010 census, and the average labor force participation rate decreased from 27% to 25%, even though the life expectancy increased by more than 3 years during the decade. This is the benefit replacement ratio relative to the pre-retirement income I was talking about. It varies by income group. If your pre-retirement income is low, the Social Security pays, depending on what year of data we look at, very generously, right? So if if your pre-retirement income is in the low income group, even it pays, the Social Security pays about twice of your pre-retirement income through when you enter the pension system. Even for the high income group, relative to the pre-retirement income, the benefit is still quite generous, right? A minimum of 71% in the 2012 data set. The sample size is quite small, but the picture you get it. Relative to pre-retirement income, Chinese social security system is quite generous, but not so if you use the average social wage as the denominator in calculating the benefit replacement ratio. So okay, so that's basically the motivating facts. There are a lot of facts that are floating around, and I want to, as I said, the goal of this research is to provide a theory that can put all these facts together and not trying to explain one particular fact using a particular story and another story for another fact. Okay, so the story I will tell is related to the title of the paper. The title of the paper has 2 words, growing pains in it. So I need to explain what do I mean by growing pains, right? So the growing part is this, right? So I will argue, and I will provide more evidence later, is that in China, the productivity growth across cohorts has been particularly fast. What do I mean? It means that, if you compare, say, workers entering the Chinese labor force, say, 5 years ago relative to the productivity of workers entering the labor force this year, there will be cohort differences in productivity. I mean, that's true in every country. In the US, from cohort to cohort, you also have productivity increase, okay? In China, that productivity increase is particularly high. I will show you the numbers later on, right? So later on, we'll estimate that the productivity differences between two consecutive cohorts in China is about 6.13%. So in other words, a cohort entering the labor market a year later will be about 6.13% more productive than the previous cohort. The corresponding number in the US is about 2%. Okay, so I will basically tell a story that in China, this cohort to cohort productivity increase being so fast, normally you consider that to be a good thing. I would like to make a case that it may bring in some growing pains, as being reflected in the puzzling features that I have described earlier related to the social security system. Okay, so this is the key that I will try to provide more evidence to, right? So the first piece of evidence I will show you to support this statement that productivity growth across Chinese cohorts is particularly fast is the following, right? So if you compare the multiples of college-educated youth, between age 25 to 34, to college-educated old, 55 to 64-year-olds, this multiple in China has gone up from 6.6 to 9.6 in the last 10 years. Let me show you this picture, right? In 2005, this is a comparison between 2005 and 2015. In 2005, in China, if you in that year's labor market, you take the ratio of college educated among the young cohort, the 25 to 34-year-old, and the college educated among the old, 55 to 64. That ratio is 6.6. In other countries, is about, except for Korea, China is really outlier. There are a lot of college educated youth relative to college educated old in China. Okay, and that multiple by 2015 gone up to 9.6. Right, so basically, you look at the cohorts, the younger cohorts, in terms of college education in China, that has been going up very, very rapidly. And this is just for 2 years across different countries. This is China going from 2006 to 2014, year by year, right? So 2006 is 6.6, 2014 is 9.6, but it has been going up steadily in this decade. Okay, so that's the first thing, suggests that the productivity growth from between cohorts has been particularly fast in China. Second piece of evidence I will argue also points to the picture of the cohort to cohort productivity growth being particularly fast in China. So if you imagine that in every cross section of labor market data, there you plot out the average wage by age, average wage. By age, right? That's the cross-sectional wage age profile will be inverted U-shaped, right? So the young workers tend to make a little lower. Older workers, the average is also lower. The peak is somewhere in the middle, right? In the U.S., that peak age, average wage age profile peaked at age 47. That has been quite steady in the last decade also, okay? In China, in 2014, the peak of the cross-sectional age wage profile is age 32. And this is very young, right? And in fact, if you look, this is 2014 data. If you look at the earlier data sets, in China's peak was about 40, and has been steadily moving to an early age, right? And in my other research paper, we have shown that we argue that this cross-sectional wage age profile can be used to separately identify cohort-to-cohort productivity growth and return to experience, right? The fact that why do wages grow from cohort to cohort? Well, the older cohort, their productivity was not as high relative to the younger cohort, but they have the benefit of accumulating experience. Okay, so the peak is reflecting the trade-off between the cohort where the peak emerges. It will reflect the trade-off between cohort to cohort productivity growth relative to return to experience. And this second fact is suggesting that China's productivity to cohort productivity growth we estimate it to be about 6.13%, and the U.S. is about 2%, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. This is a picture of the wage age profile in the China family panel study data that peaked around 32. Okay, so this is the basic hypothesis. In China, they are growing the cohort to cohort productivity is growing very fast. How can that main force help explain all the other facts that I mentioned about China's social security system? And this I will try to explain this picture, right? So. The starting point is this: the human capital gap between the young and the elderly has been quite wide. Okay, that's coming from the fact that China's productivity growth from cohort to cohort is quite fast. Now, so first the argument is the following: so imagine that the productivity of the elderly are unchanged. Okay, and the productivity of young rises at the rate of 6.13% per annum, right? And imagine that the labor market for the young has been, the wage of the young workers is determined in the competitive labor market. So as the productivity of a young rises, the wage of the young workers will also rise. Okay. Now, the next thing that I will try to, the next component is this one: is some mechanism for wage compression. Right? So the elderly productivity is assumed to be unchanged, but for some reason, maybe because of fair wage concerns, maybe because of other mechanisms that I will explain later on, the elderly wage, even though their productivity isn't increasing, the elderly wage will also grow. In China, seniority is very important. SOE often pays according to your seniority. So for some reason, the young workers' wages are growing for good reason, because their productivity is growing. The older workers' productivity isn't growing, but they would demand higher wages. Okay, so that's leads to some wage compression. Now the problem with the elderly demanding more wages, even though their productivity isn't growing, is who's going to hire them? The firms now will have to ration the labor demand for the elderly workers. Okay, so that's the paper is a story about labor demand, right? Okay, so that will lead to higher wages. The elderly workers receiving higher wages than the level that will clear the elderly's labor market, right? And lead to labor rationing from the demand side. That will lead to early retirement and low labor force participation rate. So I have to say that the genesis of this paper was a few years ago. I was asked to say something about international experience of social security system in a forum in Fudan University titled "Who Will Care for China's Elderly?" And I made some, plain vanilla kind of comment like, okay, China, the retirement age is really too early, 50 or 60, 50 for females, 60 for males. They are all very healthy, they are productive. People shouldn't be doing the square dancing. They should be they're still very productive. And there were some news reporters kind of writing up something about the forum, and there were comments from readers. And some comments were saying, look, I would love to work, but no one is willing to hire me. I initially thought, okay. They of course said this is, you are a fake expert, that's all fine, but there are actually some good points there, right? So I thought, okay, that's interesting, right? So it's not like, you raise the retirement age, you can expect that, there will be firms willing to hire them at the wage that the elderly are willing to work or willing to exert the effort that's expected from the employer. So I thought, okay, that's worth looking into. That's where I started to think about the labor demand side. Okay. Okay. So for some reason, imagine that some mechanism leads to wage compression. Right? The productivity difference between the elderly and the young is bigger than the wage difference between the elderly and young, leading the firms to ration the labor demand of the elderly worker. So the elderly worker labor force participation rate are forced to be low, not because they don't want to work, it's just because at the wage they're willing to work, no firms are, there not enough firms are willing to hire. Okay, and so that can explain, even though the population dependency ratio is unchanged, the system dependency rate, in-system dependency ratio will be higher because the elderly workers who could have worked, they are not working because there are not enough labor demand for them. Okay, this is this part. And also, it will help explain the wage age profile hump moving earlier from 40 years to 32 years. And then the third part I will explain later, I will come back to this picture later, is imagine that a government is trying to set the optimal, according to some social welfare criteria, the contribution rate. Then we can also explain, with that part, we can also explain why the contribution rate will be so high. Replacement rate relative to pre-retirement wage is high, but relative to the average wage, social average wage is low, and so on. Okay, so the third part I will come back to this picture again. So let me explain the mechanism in words before I show you some equations. So fast productive growth of the young generation versus the older generation is the key driving force of the model. Normally, as I said, in a overlapping generations model of Social Security, productivity growth is a good thing. But here, because of a behavioral mechanism that is underlying this wage compression, this fast productive growth might lead to some growing pains as reflected in many puzzling facts in the Chinese social security system, right? The old workers' employment is rationed as a result of the elderly demanding a wage to be higher than the market clearing wage, which is their marginal productivity. So the old employment is rationed. The low force participation rate of the old is coming from the labor demand side, and the in-system dependence ratio is high because not all the workers that can work are actually working, even though the population-wide dependence ratio is still low. Okay, and we don't. In the model, we also include savings. So the old will save more because they will spend longer time in retirement. That can explain the high savings rate in China. And finally, when we consider the third component, the contribution rate of the workers must also be higher as a result of the in-system dependence ratio being quite high. And our explanation does not rely on population aging, the changing demographic structure, or possible defects of the Social Security system, even though we believe these are all part of the explanation of the problems we see in China. But our explanation by design do not rely on these features. Okay, very simple illustration model to formalize the idea. Then I will watch out my time. So consider a very simple two-period overlapping generations model. The first period, the workers are young, and the period length is normalized to be 1. Second period, workers are old, but they can still work if they can find jobs. The length of the period is T. So T is basically will be calibrated later to to be about 0.83. I will explain in a second. time is indexed by little t. At time t, the youth population is NTY. The time t is youth workers. Old population is NTO. O stands for old. And we assume deliberately in this model that the population growth is constant. So NTY is just 1 plus n times NTO, right? So n is the population growth rate. And in this simple model, the population-wide dependency ratio is a constant. Is the number the number of years of the old, which is t, right? Divided by t, which is t times NTO, divided by the number of young workers, which is NTY. NTYO divided by NTY is 1 over 1 plus n. So the population dependence ratio is a constant, t divided by 1 plus n. Okay, so yes?
Just a clarifying question. If I'm a 62-year-old guy in China, qualified for my retirement, if I decide to work, does the government tax back any of my pension benefits? Will I lose them, or?
Well, so once you reach the eligible age,
right.
If you work and get, there's no tax. There's no tax on your earnings.
Got it.
Thank you. Okay, so so the think about so the focus is on the labor demand side. So we'll start out by hypothesizing a firm objective function, right? This is HT is a human capital, the productivity of the age period T workers, young workers, right? LTY is the labor of the young worker. And HT minus 1 is the human capital of the older worker, the generation in T minus 1, and the LTO is the labor supply of the older worker. And these are the production functions using older workers' labor and young workers' labor. And this is the wage bill paid to the young worker, and WTO times LTO is the wage bill paid to the older worker. And the human capital growth is reflected by the ratio of HT over HT minus 1. So this is growth rate, is growth at the rate G, okay? And for simplicity, we assume that the labor market for the youth is completely competitive. Like all the young workers will be employed. That will pin down the wage of the young workers to be WTY to be just equal to the marginal productivity of the young workers when all the young workers are employed. When LTY is equal to NTY. Okay, so this is the wage of the young worker. Now, the main thing is what happens to the older workers' wage. So for now, let's assume that for whatever reason, the older workers' WTO is not determined by competitive labor market clearing condition. Instead, the older workers, for behavioral reasons, would like to request a wage that are proportional to the wage of the young worker. So the young workers' productivity is increasing, their wages are increasing. So older workers look at it and say, look, I would like to be paid also at a higher wage because look, my other younger co-workers' wages are increasing. This kappa is a number which should be 0, right? So older workers' wage shouldn't be in this the previous the production function assumed earlier should have nothing to do with the young workers' wage, but for behavioral reasons, they are somehow tied together. Okay, so kappa reflects the wage compression. So once the older workers' wage are determined, the older workers' labor supply will be determined. Right, the older workers' labor supply will be a level that will equate the marginal productivity of the older worker at the labor supply LTO to be equal to the wage that are specified here. Okay. Once you have the LTO, then you can calculate the older workers' employment rate, which is LTO divided by NTO, and this number will be strictly less than 1 as long as kappa is positive. And moreover, this employment rate of the elderly will be decreasing with respect to G. Right? So the higher the cohort to cohort productivity is increasing, the lower the employment of the elderly worker. The reason is that if G is higher, WTY will be higher, and the kappa being positive says that older worker looking at the young workers getting higher wages, they say I want higher wages as well. and the firms will demand less elderly worker labor. Okay, so WTO is now less than 1 and is decreasing. Pi TO is the employment rate of the elderly will be decreasing in G, the growth rate of the cohort to cohort productivity. Then you can look at a few statistics. The actual retirement age of the population will be 1 plus 1 is the period length of the youth. The elder age period length is capital T, but only the elderly only works pi TO fraction of that second period. So 1 plus capital T times pi TO is the actual retirement age, right? If pi TO is low because G is high, actual retirement age will be low, okay? The in-system dependency ratio is the ratio of the non-working elderly, which is 1 minus pi TO. Pi TO of the older workers are working, fraction of the older workers who are working. 1 minus pi TO are the fraction of older workers who are not working. The older worker period length is T capital T. NTO the number of older workers, and the denominator are the total number of young workers who are always working, as well as plus the older workers who are working. Right? This ratio, as you can see, if pi TO is low, this in-system dependent ratio will be high. Even though the population-wide dependent ratio, T over 1 plus N, is constant. Okay? So this basically tells the most of the story. And I will give you one quick potential mechanism for the wage compression. This is a picture plotting two things in this picture, right? On the horizontal axis, this every dot is an observation from a province. At the province, you can calculate the proportion of employment at SOE. Okay, that's horizontal axis. The y-axis is the labor force participation rate of the old in that province, right? And there are 3 different kind of dots. 1990s are here, 2000s are here, and 2010s are here. Okay, so the relationship is suggesting that if a province has a higher proportion of SOE, the labor force participation of the old in that province will be lower, right? And we are using proportion SOE as some kind of proxy for the forces that will lead to more wage compression. As I mentioned earlier, in SOE, the seniority rule tends to be stronger. If you have worked in the SOE for many years, even though you are not very productive, you tend to be paid higher than higher, right? So if your workers, if the SOEs are paying older workers higher, the labor demand there will be more wage compression. The labor rationing of the older worker will be stronger. Okay, so that's one possible mechanism behind the wage compression. The third component I will briefly mention is what about the government? If a benevolent government chooses the contribution rate to maximize some measure of social welfare, what will happen? So let me briefly explain this. Right? So the timing of the model in this part is the following. Government sets contribution rate. Firms and workers then decide on labor supply and labor demand. And the contribution rate, if contribution rate is theta, then the retirees benefits level, PT, will be theta times the social average wage, WT bar. Right? This is theta times WT bar is the amount of tax revenues collected from the contributions divided by the dependency ratio, DTI, in the system. And the social average wage is just the weighted average of the youth worker and older worker who are working. Okay. So this actually is the definition being used in the China social security system. Right. So when the Chinese social security system calculates the benefit replacement ratio. Okay. So the social welfare function is assumed to be the following. the government chooses theta, the contribution rate, to maximize the total utility of all the workers in the population, the NTY young workers. If they are young workers, they get wage WTY, but they only get to consume 1 minus theta fraction of the wage, because theta times WTY goes to pay the Social Security. And these are the older workers are working. If they're working, they still pay. They still pay Social Security contribution. And if they are not working, then they get the benefit PT. And PT is given by this formula here. Okay. And you can calculate the optimal contribution rate to be very simple, to be this formula, right? And as you can see, theta's the optimal contribution rate is a function of the labor force, the fraction of the older workers who actually work. And if pi O is low, because, for example, G is high, theta star will be high, okay? And the optimal benefit replacement rate relative to social average wage, your theta star divided by the in-system dependency ratio, is given by this formula. And again, this one, the average replacement rate relative to social average wage is positively related to pi O. So if pi O is low, the replacement rate relative to social average wage is also low. Okay, but replacement rate relative to the pre-retirement wage, right? There's another statistic you can calculate: the benefit divided by the pre-retirement wage, right? That one is given by this, right? Is approximately equal to the replacement rate of the relative to the social average wage multiplied by the ratio of young workers' wage and the older workers' wage. And this suggests that under the optimally chosen Social Security benefit, Social Security contribution rate, what can happen is that the benefit to the replacement rate relative to the social average wage is low, but the relative to the pre-retirement wage is actually high. So because WTY divided by WTO is a number bigger than much bigger than 1. Okay. Okay. So we in the general model we added savings. We provide a micro foundation for the wage compression, etc. But I will skip the general model and give you some idea of how we calibrate the general model. So for example, for the young workers in the empirical analysis, we consider people between 20 to 49 as young workers, 50 to 74 as the as the quote unquote old worker, and T is just 25 years divided by 30 years, so that's where we get 0.833. And the population growth rate is chosen. N is chosen to equate the system population-wide dependency ratio in the model to what's in the data, which in the data is 0.484, and T, in the model is corresponds to T divided by 1 plus N. We already have T, so N is given by something like 0.721, etc. We were able to calibrate all the key parameters of the model. And so this is the key slide that I want you to take home with. So once we calibrate the key parameters of the model, then we can simulate a lot of interesting statistics through the lens of the model on the different levels of G, the growth rate of cohort to cohort productivity growth rate. Okay. In China, as I said, that G parameter is calibrated to be 6.13 annually. In the U.S., it's something between 1 to 2%. Okay. So let me look at this picture and hopefully explain this what's going on here. So there are two curves in this picture. One is the labor force participation rate of the elderly as predicted by the model at different levels of G. That's this line, and the scale is on the left. Okay, so it says that at G equal to 6.13, the model's prediction of the elderly's labor force participation rate is 26.7%. Okay, now had G been about 1 to 2%, the model's prediction of the labor force participation rate of the elderly will be something like 50 to 53%. So what does that mean? So this number, when G is slower, is the cohort-to-cohort productivity growth in China had been at the US level, the elderly's labor force participation rate would have gone up because there are more labor demand for the elderly workers. Because the wage age hump being earlier than the US. The second one, I will quickly start, is the model's prediction of the actual retirement age and the optimal contribution rate. So when G is equal to 6.13, the model predicts that a social planner should choose a contribution rate that's about 17%. 70% turns out to be the effective social. So the statutory rate is 28%, but there's lots of collection problems. Lots of firms don't really contribute to the full Social Security, make the full Social Security contribution. The estimate has been that the effective Social Security contribution rate is about 17%, and our model matches that. Had the G been about 1 to 2%, the contribution rate, the optimal contribution rate would come down. Because there are more elderly workers will be working, okay? And that will be about 11%. In the US, we know, of course, the Social Security contribution rate, total contribution rate is a 12.4%, okay? And the actual retirement age as G equal to 6.13, the model predicts it to be about 54.4 years old. And when G is lower, the actual retirement age the model will predict is actually between 61 to 62 years old. But again, similar to what we see in the US. Okay, I will skip this one. Now, finally, what about delaying the retirement age? Now, in our model, retirement age is an endogenous thing, right? It's the older workers are optimizing against is choosing to work or not, right? So, and the government is choosing the contribution rate to maximize the social welfare, okay? And the observed low actual retirement age is the result of high human capital growth in China from cohort to cohort, plus some mechanisms for wage compression. And the problems facing China's Social Security is a growing pain that may actually go away when G start to come down. Okay? So delaying retirement age here, the welfare impact of delaying retirement age depends on what the workers can do. Can they save or not? Right? What kind of if they cannot save, what will be the the welfare benefits to the retiree who didn't save but are not able to work, but at the same time are not getting retirement benefits. So, but overall, basically, the delaying retirement age will reduce welfare for the elderly because the government forced them not to be able to collect Social Security benefits, but the labor market isn't there to absorb them into the labor force. Okay, so I will conclude here. We present a very simple theory focusing on the labor demand side to explain many puzzling facts related to China's social security system. The theory is built on two legs. The first leg is really based on some empirical facts that show that there is very high intergenerational human capital growth at the rate of about 6.6% per annum, right? Which is much higher than what we see in other developed economies. The second leg is a mechanism that can lead to some kind of wage compression. And the exact mechanism is not important as long as there is some mechanism that will lead the elderly to demand a wage that is not fully reflecting to their productivity. Then we have we will have the models, the mechanism emphasizing the model coming from the labor demand side will generate some kind of growing pains. There's high generational the retirement age, the actual retirement age will be quite low, and the optimal contribution rate to the social security system will be very high to reflect the fact that many older workers who could work, who are still productive, but they are not getting the job at the wage they would like to have, because of the wage compression mechanisms, and forcing the government to implement a high growth, a high contribution rate. Okay. Finally, let me just say, our mechanism complements other explanations such as population agent or various defects of social security system. We are just saying the labor demand side is also a side that's worth paying attention to, right? Forcing a delay of the retirement age without proper training to the elderly workers may lead to a situation where the elderly couldn't collect social security benefits, and at the same time, there are not enough firms willing to hire them at the wage that is exceeds their productivity. So that's thank you. Okay, Maggie said I can take a couple questions. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm a Johns Hopkins Tech student. Thank you very much, Professor Fang. My question is on how to potentially find ways for the labor market to absorb some of these older workers. I was wondering, based on the current labor system, is it possible for is there a possibility for some of these older labor workers to come back as contract workers? So on a per hourly basis, they're still earning higher salaries, but in terms of total pay, they're taking in less money because they're not working as many hours. Is there such a system that could potentially absorb them? Thank you.
Right. So yeah. So here, you can always say, the older workers can be self-employed if there's opportunity for them to be self-employed and at the same time being part of the social security system. The key thing is that. In China, if you are working as in the informal sector, in self-employed and so on, they tend not to be in the formal social security system in terms of making contribution to social security and so on. So maybe the recent tax reform that China has been introducing in I think early September might be providing an opportunity. To the extent that now social security contribution is collected through the tax system, and if self-employed are also paying the taxes, then they could, it could may work, right? But the key thing is, whether the service sector and the elderly workers can provide the kind of services that labor market that the market demands. That's another question. I think I would say the policy recommendation is to provide more trainings for the elderly worker to get the skills that are needed by the labor market. Chow?
Yeah. So I'm faculty with the IIEP and the Department of Economics. So I have one question and one comment. So one question is, if we look at across provinces, we can say that the scale distribution and the wage distribution can be quite different across provinces. So do you observe different peaks in wage age profiles across provinces? So do you see those provinces with earlier peaks, with lower labor force participation of older people? First question.
Right.
And also for those 10 years, do you see those provinces with biggest change in the peak?
Right.
Do you see the largest decline in the senior labor force participation rate? So that's a question.
Right.
My comment is that I kind of have a way to justify this behavioral parameter.
Mm-hmm.
So when the young people productivity increase, it's actually increase the reservation wage of the old people because they can always go home to take care of kids take care of their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So when the young people's wage go up, their reservation wage go up as well. So it's not quite behavioral.
Right.
It's actually there's economic reason there.
Okay, so the first, I think it's a great comment. We are proposing a story thinking about China as a single economy. Therefore, within within China, there are lots of provinces that could have very different levels of cohort-to-cohort growth rate in human capital, and whether the model's implication also is kind of supported by the cross-province variations in G, and that's something that's very interesting. We haven't done that. The second thing you are mentioning is there might be another reason for the elderly workers not to be willing to participate in the formal labor market because, because their value from being at home is higher. I think there's some. So actually, I don't. It would be nice to think about a model where both mechanisms are incorporated in the model, right? So on the one hand, the elderly's value from not working might be related to their, the kids' earnings and so on, right? So we haven't done that. I think for the paper, I think the key question is are there testable implications that can differentiate these two mechanisms? What our story was, the elderly want to work, but they have, for behavioral reasons, they ask for a wage that's higher than their marginal productivity. The others was, they may not choose to work because they have better other uses of time at home to care for their grandchildren and so on. That we have been thinking about, these testable implications, but we haven't done that. Let me take one. Yeah, there. Please.
I just wanted to do a couple of things you said I wanted to get some detail on.
Yeah.
The bottom of the thing on the replacement income had a bunch of numbers of observation that seemed quite low. Is the number of people who participate in the CPFS?
Oh, okay, this one, okay. Yeah. So these are the number of people, the size of the...
replacement benefit.
No, these are the size of the sample.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just, I'm saying these numbers could be quite noisy because sample size is quite low, but the overall picture of relative to the pre-retirement wage, the benefit replacement ratio is quite high in China. That's I think...
that's a fact.
That's a fact, right. But here is just number of observations.
And the other question is the urban formal sector is certain percentage of the total labor force. Now there's beginning to be a social security system for the rural.
Right.
There's a separate one, I gather, for party cutter, etc.
Yeah, that has been merged into this system in 2015.
The major one.
Right.
But in any case, you think that some of these things would be shifts of economic activity back and forth between these different categories. That is between the urban and the informal and so forth. And have you controlled for that factor? So
all these, in the calibration exercise, the data we use are all from urban workers. Your question about whether, if somebody has been in the urban workers basic old age insurance system, they will stay there. The rural is called the PEPR, the rural and the urban pension system. They are for rural workers rural individuals, and urban individuals who are unemployed. So they are separate. Unemployed, but if I don't think there are a lot of movements between the systems. That's my understanding. Okay, so Maggie is telling me that I should probably stop here. I will be happy to take more questions and talk to you after during the break. Thank you.